Anyways, Thea Beckman has been a member for a number of years, and a lot of you may have met her on the weekly birding outings and on some of the weekend outings that Thea led. If you read her bio on the website or the newsletter, you'll know that she's a science-educated professional writer with a lifelong passion for birding and travel. She was born in Vancouver, but grew up in South Africa, where she birded extensively with her mother from age 5. She's traveled and birded around Southeast Asia, Africa, Australia, Europe, and more recently, North, South, and Central America. Today, she works as the director of marketing of an education technology company based in the United States, but the fires of devotion to birding and travel continue to burn bright. Some of you may be aware of the significant contributions that Thea has made to Delta Nats, but some of you may not be. Excuse me, Thea put her writing and design skills to work on improving our brochure, and she was one of the key players in getting our new website online. I mean, there were other people involved, but basically Thea was leading that, and she did a wonderful job of it. She also helped me most recently with the little article that I did on Jeff Hacker, and she took my awful draft and turned it into a nice little piece. So there were 8 members from Delta Nats on the birding trip to Colombia and Panama, and Thea's speaking for them all. I'm not quite sure how that came about, but I'm sure she'll tell us. She had initially planned to present on the entire trip, Colombia and Panama, but when she started working on the presentation, she realized it was going to be too much for one evening. So after tonight, we'll still have Panama to look forward to. So I'll turn it over to Thea. I'm looking forward to this.
Thea,
you're muted.
Sorry. Okay, there we go. Okay, enough tech issues for one night. Okay, so I said thank you, Elizabeth, for the introduction. And that when I got to slide 85, I did decide that we should probably split the presentation in two. It was a very, very action-packed, incredible, soul-expanding experience, that trip that we took to Colombia and Panama. So I'm really excited to be telling you all about it tonight. What I've put together is really a photographic account of our trip to Colombia. It's more of a travel log, so it's more of the story of our adventure and all of the beautiful birds we saw, with certainly a focus on birding, which is my special interest, and just a broad overview of what it was like to travel around Colombia. So I'll kick off with an introduction to probably one of my favorite birds of the trip, was the sparkling violet ear type of hummingbird. This extraordinary photo was taken by Dave on the Paramo Nature Trail. More on that very soon. But yeah, this trip will be, this presentation will be covering the 3 main areas of Colombia that we explored, which is the high Andes in and around Bogota, and the stunning Coffee Triangle, and the Caribbean coast, and an endemic species island that was right next to the northernmost Caribbean coast of Colombia. All right, so Elizabeth, you were wondering how this trip came about. Well, I blame it squarely on Nikki and Bruce. They traveled to Colombia, I think 2023, and came back and told me about the trip, and I practically salivated over their stories of these spectacular, colorful birds, the diversity of birds that they saw. And I, as much as I have birded almost everywhere I've traveled to, I've never actually traveled to a place only to birdwatch. And so I instantly went about planning this trip, and that started off by emailing the Delta naturalists back in the day when you still could just send a spam email to the whole group, and so wanted to see if anyone else would be interested in going with me. And within 24 hours, I had about 6 respondents who were dead keen to go, and they are shown in this picture here. This is the 8 of us standing outside our hotel in Bogota, and from left to right, the Delta Nats who went on the Colombian adventure with me were Chris McVitie, Janet Heaviside, Dave Hoare, Christine Gaio, Noreen Rudd, and that's me, and Nadine Stradom, and Kerry Zhao. And so that's how the trip was conceived. It happened. It felt like it happened really quickly, but once we'd locked in the itinerary, we got together on many occasions over lunch to talk through the itinerary and to get excited and to plan, and also get to know each other better. So there we are. All right, so now let me walk you through what we did and what we saw. So here is a map showing Colombia and its neighboring countries, Ecuador to the south and Brazil, and Venezuela to the east. Yes, sorry, I have like left, like I get the two confused sometimes. And then what you'll notice on this relief map is the Andes mountain range, which dominates really the western portion of the country. And while it might not seem immediately apparent, it actually splits into three cordillera, which essentially means cords or ranges. So you have the westernmost Andes range, you have the central Andes range, and a little branch off to the west here, the western Andes range. And so we began our trip arriving on July 30th to August about the, 3rd or 4th. We were in Bogota exploring the surrounds of the high Andes. And for 4 nights we were there. And then this map zooms in just a bit. Then we flew across to Perrin, which is on the foothills of the central cordillera of the Andes Mountains. So we were much lower down here, more warmer, tropical, thank goodness, lower down. Altitude was a story, which I'll tell you about shortly. And after 3 nights, from Perrin, we traveled up to Manizales, and we birded in and around this area in the Coffee Triangle. And we spent 3 nights there. And then from there, we flew back to Bogota and then flew all the way north to Santa Marta, which was actually only about an hour's flight. And from there, we took 4x4s up to this isolated mountain range called the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. This is really testing my Spanish accent here. And we birded at the top of this mountain, where you have an incredible diversity of endemic bird species and insects and all kinds of critters who live up there, who've become isolated from main populations and who have then evolved separately and become their own unique species. And we were there for 4 nights, 2 nights at the top of the mountain and 2 nights lower down closer to the coast. And then finally we flew back to Bogota for 1 night before flying out to Panama for a week. So that was our itinerary. All right, the first 4 nights were spent in Bogota, which is Colombia's sprawling high-altitude capital. It has a population of about 8 million people, and these photos were mostly taken in La Candelaria, is the cobblestoned historic center of Bogota, and it features colonial-era landmarks, popular museums like the Museo de Oro, which is the gold museum, which has a bunch of pre-Columbian gold pieces, as well as the Museo de Botero, which is the famous Colombian artist that painted bloated fat people. But yeah, here's some photographs just taken on a historic walking tour we did during that time. But I will be focusing on the nature of our time in Bogota. So I just thought I'd throw these in so that you could get a sense of what the city felt like. All right, so day 1, we woke up nice and early and we headed up Monserrate, which is a mountain that overlooks the city center of Bogota. Now, Bogota, this is all of us, by the way, standing at the funicular station, all 8 of us. Now, I would love to tell you guys about altitude because it was one of the interesting themes of our trip early on. I have never suffered from altitude sickness before, so I really underestimated what it would feel like. And I think I sort of get a general sense that maybe I was the one who suffered the most. I had terrible heart palpitations. I was, found it very lightheaded. And I know that Noreen as well suffered, but that we had some medication that helped. But anyway, don't let that deter you. It was worth it. So Vancouver, just for relative sake, is average 34 meters above sea level. Brunswick Mountain, which is the tallest point in the North Shore Mountains, is 1,788 meters above sea level. Bogota is 2,648 meters above sea level, which is 850 meters higher than our highest mountain here in the Vancouver area. And Monserrate is an additional 530 meters higher than Bogota. So that's a lot of altitude to gain in a short 24 hours. This photograph was taken from the funicular station at the top of Monserrate and overlooks the sprawling mass that is Bogota city. And you can see the lovely lush vegetation on the mountainside and the funicular sort of puttering its way up to the top. So yeah, in 24 hours, we had rocketed up 3,138 meters of elevation, and boy, could we feel it. Hammering hearts, it makes it difficult to sleep when your heart is like a jackhammer in your chest. But let me tell you, there is no greater panacea for illness than brand new avifauna waiting to be explored, especially one as rich and colorful and varied as Colombia's. So this is just another view from Monserrate, and I think it's wonderful that they've done such a good job of preserving this vegetation on this mountain. All right, so here we are on the Páramo Nature Trail, which is just a short 360-meter pathway that winds its way around sort of the face of the mountain. And they've lined it with bird feeders and hummingbird feeders to attract the local bird life. There are a lot of very special hummingbirds that thrive at these high altitudes, these high Andes, that you won't see elsewhere. So we were seeing a lot of near endemics and endemic bird species on this trip. And this is Nadine and I playing with these trumpet flowers, and Noreen having a chuckle in the background. Oh, these trumpet flowers are a favorite of a particular hummingbird, which you will see shortly. So on the subject of hummers, now here in Vancouver, we have Anna's hummingbird. In summer, we have Rufus hummingbird. And if you're real lucky, a calliope wanders a little far to the west. But for the most part, you're seeing only a single species of hummingbird most of the year round. We go here and, you know, in 3 hours of birding, we see 12 different hummingbird species of all shapes and colors and sizes. And, you know, from this diminutive white-throated wood star, the middle photo, which is, you know, hardly bigger than a large bumblebee, and sort of flies in the same floating way, to the enormous sapphire. Oh gosh, I don't have it on this one, but anyway, I'll show you a photo of that one shortly. To the shining sunbeam, also very large hummingbird of gorgeous russet color, and on the left we have the blue-throated star frontlet. I delighted in their names as much as I did their colors and their behaviors. So those are 3 hummingbird species we saw on the Páramo Nature Trail. Here is the sword-billed hummingbird, which has the longest bill relative to its body size of any bird in the world. And you can see how it has taken to these trumpet flowers with this long beak. And this is such a fantastic photo by Dave, where he captured the hummer right in front of the flowers, so you could actually see how its bill would fit neatly into such a long flower. And this was the bird I was trying to remember. The great sapphire wing on the right is an enormous hummingbird. It's about the size of a starling, but slimmer, so not nearly as chunky. But because of its relative size and its slow, floppy wing beats, it reminded me quite a bit of the way, like a bat, its floppy flight. So it's so weird to see this bat-like bird like at the feeder. And then on the left leg, we have the glowing puff legs, which has this gorgeous little poofy booties on its legs. These are birds of the high Andes, and so it kind of makes sense that they would have fluffy booties to protect its legs from the cold, because it is quite cold high up. And in fact, the whole time we were in Bogota, it was pretty chilly. There was an icy wind blowing at the top of Monserrate, and when we went further north, which I'll tell you about shortly. All right, but there were other birds too on the Páramo Nature Trail. The Andean guan is a chicken-like bird that hangs out in trees. There were lots of warblers. There was the golden-fronted white start is in the middle, and the top right, the pale-naped brushfinch, and the bottom right is the rufous collared sparrow, which is actually a very common bird to be seen around Bogota, but a really beautiful little sparrow. One thing I should have mentioned earlier, but the color I've chosen for the background of this presentation is directly drawn from the underside of the tail of the sparkling violet ear, which you probably would have noticed on the introduction page. Another bird we saw, which I was very much taken by, was the masked flower piercer. Now, if you look at the bill shape, it's got this really sharp tooth at the end of its beak. And what this sneaky bird does is, and I've included a photograph from eBird just to illustrate what it does, is it pierces the base of the corolla and it pirates nectar from within the flower without actually going inside the flower to help pollinate it. So because of that, these birds are known as pirates, because they're not returning the favor of nectar by pollinating the flower. All right, so here's another view from the top, right at the top of Monserrate. And here we stopped for a little cacao de té, or té de cacao, which is a tea made from cocoa leaves, which is supposed to help combat altitude sickness. But all it really did was add a whole lot of caffeine to an already shaky, fast heartbeat. So I don't know if it did all that much good for us. But we concluded our first day with 27 bird species. I mean, all of which were lifers for me. So it was really such an exciting day. Then on day 2, we went to Parque Nacional Naturale Chingaza. Now this is, we left about 4:30 in the morning. It's a protected territory of high Andean cloud forests and wet moorland habitat known as the Paramo. So it's a unique vegetation biome that plays a huge role in the ecology of Bogota. So it took us about an hour and a half to 2 hours of a bone-rattling car ride on really potholed, awful roads to get there. But, you know, once we got there, it was well worth it. And we kicked off with a bit of roadside birding. And on the right, you'll see this typical biome of the called the Paramo. And this flower is sort of an iconic species of this vegetation. So the Paramo plays an extremely important ecological role in Colombia. Espeletia, which is commonly known as frejejón, which means big monks, is a genus of perennial subshrubs whose hairy leaves and thick spongy trunks trap water vapor from the air and release it through their roots into the soil. So about 85% of the fresh water in Colombia is processed by plants like the frejejón and released into lakes, rivers, and streams. So that's why this is such an important vegetation in Colombia. So Chingaza, our altitude was even higher than Monserrate at 4,020 meters. We were 800 meters higher. So my poor beating heart, I swear. We saw some very, very sweet, cool birds here. We flushed out a noble snipe, shorebird that actually likes the Paramo, high Andean Paramo. And we saw this black-crested warbler on the bottom left. And then after doing that roadside birding, we stopped at a little farm and bed and breakfast that was run by the reserve's owner for breakfast. And then we descended into the mountain folds and its thick blanket of clouds. These are not called cloud forests for nothing, as you can see in the central photo of us walking down the road. Although in spite of the thick cloud cover, we saw a huge number of species. I think we did struggle a bit to capture good photos of them. This really highlights the difficulty of birding in the tropics and in locations like this. For starters, you've got these clouds, which sort of make visibility difficult. You're looking at birds that are in the high canopy. Some of them are on top of the leaves as opposed to underneath. They're in the thicket of the foliage. They're deep inside, so you hear them and you hear the rustling and you see the movement, but you really have to be patient and determined to catch a good enough, look at them to identify them, and an even better look if you want to get a decent photograph. But as you can see, our group did manage to capture some. The scarlet-bellied mountain tanager, top left, bottom left, the chestnut-bellied chat tyrant, type of flycatcher. The top right, okay, I kind of pirated this one from eBird, but it was worth including because the hooded mountain tanager is an enormous tanager. The one that we get here, the western tanager, is sort of, a small robin, well, smaller than a robin size, but the hooded mountain tanager is probably 2-3 times. It's like a tank of a tanager. So that was really, really interesting to see. And the Plumbeus sierra finch in the bottom right there. And one thing I wanted to say, which is also super interesting about the tropics, is that the bird's behavior here is very interesting and varied. And there is this feeding technique that is called a mixed flock. So a mixed flock is an aggregation of 2 or more species. In our case, although it was still one moment, and the next moment it was like the entire vertical architecture of the forest came alive with all of these birds singing and chirping and jumping and moving around. There were about at least 5 bird species, and they all feed together. They move through the forest like a unified army, and they all feed at different verticals in the forest. Some are feeding on the bark of the trees, some are picking insects from the underside of leaves, and some are picking insects from the top of leaves. Some are hunting the bromeliads for insects that have gotten trapped in the little cups of water that these plants collect. And I've got a photo of one in this slide. On the right-hand side, a bromeliad epiphyte plant that grows on top of other plants or trees. Yeah, so 1 minute it could be dead quiet in the forest, and the next minute you're in the middle of this mixed flock of birds, and they're all sweeping through the forest and herding insects in a way, and working together to get their breakfast. And it's so exciting, and you don't know where to look, and next minute it's gone quiet again. So that was one of my best memories of our early time in Colombia, was being in the middle of that mixed flock of birds. And here are just some photos of the almost prehistoric looking misty environments that we were birding in, with every surface just carpeted in thick moss and bromeliads. We also saw the near endemic coppery-bellied hummingbird, or pufflegs rather, on the left, which our guide later told us was quite special and rather uncommon bird for the region. He said of every 8 tour groups he takes out, maybe 1 will see the coppery-bellied puffleg. So we got a nice look at that. The pearled tree runner is kind of the same idea as a brown tree creeper here. Same concept of a bird. It sort of hunts the tree bark for insects, but it's so much more beautifully adorned. This was one of the birds we saw in the mixed flock. And on the right, the Longomare's sun angel. I mean, they're just hummingbird names are the best, really. So yeah, at the end of the day, we had another 20 species to our list. On day 3, we did our historic walking tour. This is us standing in a cobbled street, about to go into a cafe for some coffee. And we spent the day walking around the historic heart of Bogota, and those photos I showed you early on. But I won't go too much into this because, again, the focus of this is nature. Of course, I was on the lookout because sometimes, cities are home to new birds, especially if it's a brand new city. The interesting contributions of Bogota were the great thrush, very ubiquitous, enormous thrush that would be first to sing in the morning. So that was to be the melody that we woke up to. And then in the middle, you have the eared dove, which is the most ubiquitous dove in, I think, South America, if not just Colombia. Black vultures were also very common, and we saw them at the top of Monserrate, just sort of soaring over the city. And of course, the rufous collared sparrow was another common city bird. And then, of course, there were dozens of those feral pigeons, but I won't dignify them with a photo. So, all right. So that's concluded the first leg of our trip. And on day 4, we flew from Bogota to Pereira. It was a 30 minutes flight away. So no sooner had we hit cruising altitude than we descended. And Pereira is the most populous city in Colombia's coffee axis or coffee triangle. And once again, you'll notice it's located just sort of on the foothills of the central Cordillera of the Andes, which means it is a lower altitude, thank goodness. So at 1,400 meters, it's a good 1,400 meters lower than Bogota. And we immediately felt the difference, or I immediately felt the difference. So our destination was Manizales, and it's much warmer, more tropical and humid than Bogota. So not only was there a relief from altitude sickness, but we could also expect a smorgasbord of fresh tropical bird life. So this photo was taken from the plane as we were coming into land in Pereira, and you can just see how lovely and tropical it is. And there's us all on the plane looking excited for some new birds. So this was the routes, just to give you an idea of where we were located. So we struck out from Perrin International Airport in the bottom of the map there. And our first stop, well, we stopped en route to Santa Rosa de Cabal, which was a hot springs. More on that in a bit. We stopped en route to take a look, just to absorb the bird life, because although the birds that we were seeing out the window of the car were perfectly common to our driver and tour guide, we were losing our minds because, oh my God, we've never seen the barefaced ibis, or we've never seen this bird, and, you know, tropical kingbirds, wow, you know. So they stopped off at a lookout and allowed us to do some birding there. And then we stopped at Santa Rosa de Cabal for a couple of hours. And then from there, we drove north to just on the outskirts of Manizales to our accommodation for the next 3 nights, which was the Hacienda Venezia. Just wait till you see that, where we stayed. So this is very typical scenery of the Coffee Triangle. Big stands of guadua bamboo in the background there. And then in the front, this is cultivated coffee plants. And just rolling hills, adorned with rich carpets of palm trees, banana palms, coffee plantations, and other big leafed, flamboyantly flowered tropical oddities. And the birds. So now we really got rich into the tanager life. We get 1, maybe 2 tanagers here. But in Colombia, there are just dozens and dozens of tanager species. So the drabbest probably, oh no, there is a drabber one, but the palm tanager was the most common. On the top left there, beneath that, the blue-gray tanager, which also incredibly common. So by the end of the trip, we were like, oh, it's just a blue-gray tanager. Meanwhile, it's a really beautiful bird. The top right, we've got the scrub tanager, and the bottom right, just to throw a wrench, a saffron finch. We saw all of these birds when we stopped at that lookout. And do I have a video of that? No, yes, I do. I have a video. So I'm going to switch over to that video. Can I get a, yes, we can see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, cool. All right, so hopefully the quality of that wasn't too awful. Dave, was that okay? Should I play it again, or did you get a good look at that?
Probably play it again, I guess.
Okay. Okay, so that's a video I took from us driving along, you know, in the Coffee Triangle, just to give you an idea of just, you know, how lush and tropical it was. So hopefully the video quality wasn't too terrible. All right, so this is the hot springs that I mentioned. We stopped at Santa Rosa Hot Springs, and it is just this almost unbelievable, like, it's just, you walk into this what it looks like a cleft in the mountain, and the steep mountain, just heavily treed, and this natural waterfall that's cascading down. And then of course these pools have been man-made, but it's just the most spectacular setting. And of course, no sooner had we arrived than we were already looking for the bird life. And there were about 5 white-capped dipper hunting the pools and the rapids along these man-made pools here. Higher up, this is the hot springs. You can see a lot of locals lounging around, and some members of our party also hopped in to the hot water. It was pelting down with rain when we arrived, and I mean really pelting down, but it's so warm that you almost, it's hardly an inconvenience. But everyone, most of us hopped into the hot springs to take a bath, and the rest of us hunted around the periphery of this stunning setting for bird life, of which of course there was so much. This western emerald is a hummingbird, a small hummingbird that was feeding from these colorful pink flowers that you can see around the periphery of the pools in this bottom, in the right-hand photo. And on the left, the torrent tyrannulet was a little flycatcher that was zipping up and down the streams, hunting insects. The Andean motmot was, I mean, just one of those celebrity birds, those gorgeous, large, colorful tropical birds that sits and waits for prey. It waits for an insect to come along, and then it'll catch it. So this kind of gives you an insight into just how rich the tropics are as a source of food in resources for birds. When you can employ a feeding strategy where you just sit and wait for like a Big Mac to land at your feet and then you can feed, it just goes to show how like rich the tropics are compared to the temperate zones where birds actually have to work for their meals. So Andean motmot is one of these large, colorful tropical birds that just sits and waits. And we were just, as we walked into Santa Rosa Hot Springs, it was just there. And so we got such great photos of it. We also saw this green-fronted lancebill in the top. It's a hummingbird. Bottom, a familiar species, house wren, was singing loudly from around the bathhouse. And then on our way out, we saw the yellow-crested caracara. It's a new world bird of prey in the falcon family. And these birds are more closely related to parrots than they are to actual buzzards or eagles, although of course they resemble birds of prey. But these guys were hanging out on top of a bunch of reclining cows, and they were pulling ticks off of the cows. So yeah, got to get your lunch where you can. Speaking of lunch, we stopped at a place for that felt super authentic, and I had this lunch of bandeja paisa, which is a traditional feast of rice, avocado, plantain, beans, chorizo sausage, pork crackling, beefsteak, and a fried egg. And the antidote surely to any hangover. But yeah, it was a really welcome lunch after all of that hard birding we were doing. And then we arrived at Hacienda Venezia Coffee Farm, literal heaven on earth. So perched atop a plateau overlooking rolling hills, cultivated with coffee on a yawning expanse of emerald lawns, the Hacienda Venezia is the closest thing to heaven you'll get without some sort of preceding tragedy. Words that I wrote in my travel diary when we got there. Just incredible. So here's some photographs from around the house. It was a big Spanish-style villa with wraparound porches. Top left, just photographs of some of the embracing vegetation that we saw, and of course, so much bird life. Bottom left is just the luxuriously appointed accommodations, wooden floors, high ceilings, and big red shutters, and no mosquito nets or anything. And yeah, those stunning wraparound verandas was just great for birding because there were a lot of hummingbird feeders and fruit feeders scattered around for us to just sit and bird from. Here are some of the bird life around the house. I sort of had to go to eBird for these. The great kiskadee is just, it is a large flycatcher in the tyrant family. Then there's the white-necked Jacobin in the middle, another beautiful hummingbird. And the southern rough-winged swallow in the bottom. These guys were skimming the water in the swimming pool out front. And blue-headed parrots were very noisy, would fly over in the evening on their way to their roost, wherever that was. They were very difficult to see, actually, parrots, even though they're large, colorful birds. They're quite sort of sneaky and secretive and manage to hide in the high canopy and obscure themselves and blend in really well, of course, in the palm trees. But yeah, so these were some of the common birds we saw and heard around the villa. So on day 5, we got up at the crack of dawn yet again. On every morning, we got up at the crack of dawn, and we departed Hacienda Venezia for Tinamu Nature Reserve, which is in the district of Caldas, a veritable birders' paradise. It's about 18 kilometers from Manizales, and here we all are having a nice breakfast. Here's a photograph of the gardens around Timanu's guest house. Once again, all of these places were just bedecked in feeders and hummingbird feeders and fruit feeders. And so these are some of the spectacularly colorful birds that we saw, sometimes many of them at a single feeder. And so it was like a kaleidoscope. You have the blue-necked tanager on the left, crimson-backed tanager in the middle, black-throated mango on the right, and then bottom, thick-billed euphonia. The spectacled parrotlet is a tiny parrot. I mean, I'm trying to think of a comparison, but, you know, probably It's like a small starling. I mean, it's just a tiny little parrot, so sweet. And the brown-throated parakeet were just some of the, I think we were almost hit 50 different species on this particular birding trip. And then here were some of the cool, funky vegetation types we saw. I am woefully ignorant when it comes to botany, but I was intrigued by the guadua bamboo forests that we saw, the golden shrimp plant, and these beehive gingers. That was very cool. So then after we birded around the grounds, we struck out along heavily forested trails to find some of Tinamu's specialities, the golden collared manakin on the right and the gray-headed dove on the left. So our tour guide would play these bird calls on a Bluetooth speaker, but or in fact, all of our guides employed this technique. They would place the Bluetooth speaker further along the trail, and then we would retreat so that we would, at the very least, not upset the birds, or the birds would not perceive us, and would come to investigate the calls. And so in doing so, allow us to get some photographs and to get a good look at the birds, because otherwise birding in the forest we probably wouldn't have seen 70% of the bird life we saw if we hadn't coaxed it out to show itself. And the gray-headed dove was an example of a very, very shy bird that you would hear calling but wouldn't see. Golden collared manakin. I have a YouTube video that shows the actual displays of these birds. So there's a whole bunch of manakin species, and they all have the habit of displaying in leks. And leks are like frat parties. All the men get together and they show off for the girls, and they compete for the attention of females by doing crazy, crazy things. And this particular, the golden collared manakin, that creates this loud snapping vibration sound by snapping its wings behind it. And then it projects its chin feathers out, and then it hops from branch to branch. So I have a YouTube video, and I'm going to play it. And please, somebody say something if there's an issue with this sound.
There's no sound.
I can't hear anything. I can't hear anything.
I was really hoping that wouldn't happen. I think the issue is that I need to, it's a trade-off. If I need to disable my microphone in order for the sound from this to, so I don't know how to do that.
In the chat, Thea.
What's that?
Why don't you put the link in the chat for people to refer to later?
Yeah, I'll do that. That's a good idea. I'll do that because it's worth watching. It hops from branch to branch, and it creates this loud snapping, vibrating sound. And it's we actually heard it making that sound while we were birding on these trails. So rather than struggle to do that right now, I'll put the link in the chat afterwards. Okay, let's boldly continue on. So there were some other very cool big birds in Timanu. There was the black-chested jay, the bare-faced ibis in the middle, and roadside hawk on the right that we saw. And then, of course, in the evenings back at Hacienda Venezia, we would grab a glass of South American Sauvignon Blanc and hang out in the, dang it, what are those things called? I've gone blank. We would lounge about on the patio and enjoy the beautiful sunsets that just seemed to last forever. And then we would, compare our notes, look at our photos, and just really enjoy those evenings together. All right, hammock, that's the word. All right, so day 6, we went to Finca Romilia. Finca means farm. And so this is just a farm/nature reserve located about 45 minutes from the city of Manizales. It's home to 218 species of birds, and the owner also has a private collection of 8,000 orchid plants that some of us went to go look at. Kicked off the day with a locally grown banana and some coffee. And here are some pictures of the views, just again, so lush, so tropical. And on the right, we walked through a citrus orchard. Some of the birds, the specialities of the day, bat falcon. I'm just thinking how I'm going to just do what I did last time and go from left to right and then left to right again. All right, so bat falcon, yellow-backed oriole, and then Colombian chachalaca, which is, again, another chicken-like arboreal bird that quite noisy, likes to hang out in trees. The bottom left bay-headed tanager was one of my favorites. It looks like something a child would color in if you gave it like a drawing book to color, like a picture of a bird to color in. It's just such an odd hodgepodge of colors. So beautiful. The middle is a jet ant bird. Now, ant birds are a very interesting and counterintuitive group of birds. They don't actually eat ants, but what they do in Colombia, you have great hordes of army ants. And the army ants, as they mobilize through the forest, they chase the insects away because, my God, if an army ant gets hold of an insect, it will be gone within seconds. In fact, army ants are pretty dangerous and you don't want to get bitten or caught in the middle of a swarm of them. But when these army ants mobilize, they flush out just clouds of insects, and ant birds are among the many species that like to use that as a feeding strategy. And so they've been called ant birds because they use ants as a part of their feeding strategy, but they don't actually eat the ants themselves. So this jet ant bird was one of the many we saw. And in the bottom is the grayish picolet, is a diminutive little woodpecker, and that's endemic apparently to Finca Romelia. So it's one of the only places, in fact, if not the only place they've seen it or that it's found. So I remember it being a very special bird that we were able to see. We did get some photos of it, but eBird was able to cough up something a little clearer. We had breakfast under a sprawling nojales, which is a black walnut tree. And I found a cat, so I was very happy. But yeah, the bottom right is a breakfast of a potato cake, which Nadine talks about fondly to this day. And a special bird we saw was the mustached puffbird. Puffbirds, similar to the motmots that I showed you, are sort of wait and strike birds. They sit very still until an insect comes along and then they go for it, which makes them quite tricky to see because they're very still. But we luckily spotted this guy. I think our guide heard it calling and then used callback to bring it in. This photograph was taken by Carrie of crested caracara, same sort of family of birds as the yellow-headed caracara, but pretty iconic, I feel. We see them in the southern extremes of the United States, but I was really excited we got to see them here. Again, in the falcon family, these birds. Okay, so I've got my eyeballs on the time. I have 17 minutes left, but after our stay in the Coffee Triangle, we flew back to Bogota and up to Santa Marta. We spent the first 2 nights in El Dorado Nature Reserve, which is located right at the top of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, that isolated mountain range I showed you. And then another 2 nights much lower down, in fact, right at the coast, where we went to Tayrona National Park. And we stayed at a resort called Senda Cogiwa. So yeah, this is us flying into Santa Marta. It's right on the Caribbean coast. Okay, so this was our route. I would like to impress upon you that if you would like to see endemic special birds, you have to go to distant, faraway places along extremely windy, rutted, uncomfortable roads. And you have to go to remote places if you want to see special birds. So this shows our route, but does not show the exquisite pain that we were in for much of the ride. As we departed from the airport, we turned up to ascend the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta to go to El Dorado Nature Reserve, which is near the top of this mountain range. And it took us about 2.5 hours, and there was some incredibly deep cloud cover on our way, and I have a video to show you, so I'm going to do that. You can really see that how thick it got. My driver could surely barely see more than 10 meters in front of us. So yeah, pretty spooky. Did everyone see that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool.
Mhm.
Thank you. All right, so en route, let me show you our noble steeds for the journey. So we had to take 4x4s. So our group split into 3 groups of 3 and 2 apiece-ish. And we drove all the way to as far as we could get. And then at a certain point, we had to barrel out of the 4x4s and hike the remaining 15 minutes to the actual El Dorado Nature Reserve, the resort where we stayed, while some of the royalty among us got to take a tuk-tuk to the top. The rest of us had to hike. But I want to read to you something I wrote at the time. The road to El Dorado isn't paved with gold, but rather boulders the size of elephants. In fact, the last hour to the nature reserve made the road to Chingaza look like an 8-lane autobahn. By the time we arrived in the pitch darkness, our internal organs had surely been rearranged. But if you want to see exotic endemic bird species, you need to travel far and endure much discomfort. That's what I told myself over and over again as my liver fought my lungs for space in my abdominal cavity. So yeah, not very comfortable. I'm still moaning about it to this day. So. All right, but we did stop for some birding, which always makes the pain tolerable. And at this sweet little pit stop, we saw blue-naped chlorofonia, and on the right, brown violet ear, and bottom, the rusty flower piercer, which was similar to the different species of flower piercer, obviously. All right, so El Dorado Nature Reserve is exquisitely beautiful. You are hanging out in thatched huts at the top of a mountain with 360-degree views of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta and the Caribbean Ocean and the coastal cities that dots the coast there. I have some video, again, I'm going to quickly show you. This first one was taken just outside our hut.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's right. Oh my gosh.
Oh.
I mean, it was just like, I'm like, I must have done something right in my life to be here. And here's another panorama. This is not, I filmed this one. So you have a cluster of guests of those huts where we all stayed. And then you had to walk along a really muddy trail to get to the top restaurant and sort of reception area, which is where we would take our meals. But it was just, the construction of it was 360-degree glass panels. So you had these incredible views all around. And they had, of course, the usual assortment of fruit and nectar feeders for the birds. Weather didn't play along very nicely, but in spite of that, it's still beautiful. There you can see the hummingbird feeders.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Really, really special. All right. Okay, and this is us hiking up to our accommodations, but you can see we don't mind too much. Yes, the picture quality on the left is a bit crappy, but that's the restaurants at the top, and you can just see those glass, the sort of wraparound glass windows. And even the cabins had wraparound glass windows, and so that's what it looked like on the inside. So we were very, very comfortable. We may have suffered to get here, but once we were here, we were happy and comfortable. Right, so day 8 dawns over to Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. It is blissfully, it is clear, or at least temporarily until the mist socked in. But this was the early morning mountain views. I took this photo from my cabin. Now, I wanted to explain a little bit about why this area is so special. So the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta is a mountain range that's kind of become cut off from the rest of the Andes in the northern parts of Colombia. And you can see here from this relief map. So what happens is, wait, I wrote something here that's interesting. So it reaches an elevation of 5,700 meters, just 42 kilometers from the Caribbean coast, making it the highest coastal range in the tropics and one of the highest coastal ranges in the world. And because of this isolation from, the main mountain ranges and the other sort of populations of high Andean birds and well, animals really, the population that has been cut off has evolved separately from the main populations. So this is called geographic speciation, when a population breaks off from a main population and evolves separately. So while you have, for example, the Santa Marta brush finch, which looks very similar to the brush finches that we saw at the Paramo Nature Trail on top of Montserrat in Bogota, it is a completely different species of bird. And there's so many examples of that. So on our first day, we drove 8 kilometers to the top of a ridge, which took us an hour and a half because of the quality. The roads are basically riverbeds. And when it rains heavily, they actually turn into rivers. So we went to the top of the ridge to do some birding, to look for some of these endemic bird species. And yes, there is a military base at the top of the mountain too. And we saw these guys while we were birding, and makes one a little nervous to see a child walking around with an AK-47. But they were friendly. So one of the most special, subjectively speaking, of the endemics that we saw was the Santa Marta parakeet, which is a long-tailed and rather plain parakeet. This is an eBird description. I don't think it looks plain at all. With a thick white eye ring and red blotches on its face and underwings. And so it was actually for the purpose of preserving this endangered bird that the El Dorado Nature Reserve was founded in the first place. But we saw a ton of endemics, all with the same name: Santa Marta parakeet, Santa Marta antpitta. Antpitta is like a cartoon bird. It's just this fat, plump bird with a robust beak and long legs and a non-existent tail. Just the most comical looking thing. There's the Santa Marta brush finch I was referring to, and even a Santa Marta tarantula. All of these are unique creatures in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta mountains. Then there was the stunning Santa Marta blossom crown and the Santa Marta wood star, another tiny hummingbird species. Other highlights of our birding of the El Dorado was the golden hooded tanager, sparkling violet ear, of course, one of my favorites, the streak-headed wood creeper, and the bottom there we've got masked titaira. I don't even know what comparable species I could compare that to here in Vancouver, but anyway. Hermit wood wren. We saw probably well over a dozen different species of wrens on our whole trip. And the gorgeous little southern emerald toucanet. Now, toucans are special birds. They're iconic birds of the tropics. Colorful, pretty, but their calls, they sound more like frogs than I guess you would expect them to have a pretty call, but they sound nothing like it. Okay, and then on our third day in Santa Marta, we came down from El Dorado, and on the way down, our guide spotted these Colombian red howler monkeys. You see, I've got a video of them calling, but of course you guys won't be able to hear that. So what I'll do is I'll see if I can share a link to that as well. Or you can just honestly look at, howler monkeys calling on YouTube, because it is an unreal sound. Sounds like an elephant growling. It's the closest thing I can come up with. But yeah, so we saw these guys, and they were, lolling about in the trees, munching on leaves, sort of picking in each other's ears and scratching their backs. And they're really quite sweet animals. All right, so day 9, we struck out on the Don Diego River, and finally we saw some water birds. It was quite a relief to be birding a river, because water birds are big and they're not shy, and they're just hanging out, and you don't have to work hard to see them. They're not shrouded in mist. They're not hiding behind leaves. They're just doing their thing. So we saw snowy egret, green heron, Amazon kingfisher, greater Annie in the bottom left there. Annies are a type of cuckoo, yellow-crowned night heron, and the enormous ringed kingfisher, which is larger even than our kingfisher species. So there were quite a few recognizable species for us, and quite a lot of new birds. But of course, the highlight of the Don Diego River was the keel-billed toucan. And I mean, we just chased this guy, and I turned around at one point and I looked at everyone on the right, and you can just see how enraptured everyone was that we were seeing our first toucan of the trip. And we would see many more after this point, but it was just so lovely to get a good look at this guy. We also saw some raptors. We didn't get great looks at them, but we got the gray-headed kite and great black hawk, which were sort of patrolling the river. And I think it was the great black hawk that performed a few flyovers, and each time it did, it was being chased by a tropical kingbird or a kiskadee or one of the sort of sassy flycatcher birds. All right, this was our accommodation, Sendakogiwa Tropical Resorts. No big deal, you know, just look at that. I mean, heaven on earth. There's a photograph of our bedroom. The bottom left shows the communal dining area and the pools, which were just bliss, because at Sendakogiwa, we were now down very much at sea level. And, you know, on the Northern Caribbean coast, it was hot and humid. So it was really nice to come back from birding trips and to go for a swim. Day 10, and this is, I think, one of the last days of our birding in Colombia. We went to Tayrona National Park, which is located about 34 kilometers from Santa Marta. And it is one of the most important natural parks in Colombia and one of the most popular, according to our guide. It's made up of 12,000 hectares of land, 3,000 hectares of ocean, making it one of the areas with the greatest diversity of species in all of Colombia and South America, according to the website. And here we are, starting our morning with a bit of birding. It was pretty quiet this morning. On this particular morning, we didn't see a whole lot early on. We did some roadside birding, heard the howler monkeys going crazy. And then we found ourselves a little slice of Caribbean coast, which was just so divine. And it's the first time we actually laid our eyes on a real Caribbean beach, complete with palm trees, crashing surf, and magnificent frigate birds, which we nicknamed friggin' birds. So these guys totally live up to their names. They have a wingspan of up to 2.44 meters or 8 feet, but they weigh a paltry 1.35 kilograms on average. And this was my first time ever seeing one of these seabirds, and their angular silhouette sort of brings to mind like a pterodactyl surfing on the onshore breeze. So I love these birds. Spectacular. Lovely photo by Dave of the crashing waves. It was nice to be on the open ocean again. And we saw some other seabirds in the bottom left, the sandwich tern. That little yellow patch on the tip of the bill is sort of diagnostic of sandwich terns. It's a typical feature. And we had brown pelican on the right. There were other things happening besides birds. And so if you kind of, if things were quiet, we could turn our attention to creepy crawlies. There were rainbow whiptail hanging about, bathing in the sun, and just dozens and dozens of green iguana babies everywhere. It was kind of felt like a bit of a plague of them. And there were some adults too, but the babies are quite colorful. And this just shows sort of the typical trails through Tayrona National Park. So after we visited the coast, we walked through some of the boardwalk trails through the thick rainforest. And it was pretty hard to bird these trails because this is a very popular national park. So, you know, every time we stopped to look at a bird, there would be people trying to squeeze past us. And of course, they would stop and wonder what we were looking at. And invariably, it was some small, shy, furtive little bird. And so the minute you tell them that, they all look disappointed and would move on. But we did see one particular special bird in this place called the lance-tailed manakin. Similar to that manakin I showed you earlier, also tends to display in lakes. But this photograph was just a fabulous snap by Kerry. It took us ages to get to see this bird. You know, we had probably looked for it for a good 45 minutes to an hour, and we would come back to the same location to look for it. So when we did eventually spot the manakin, it felt like winning the lottery. Okay, and then on day 11, we returned to Bogota. This little bird's called a banana quit, and it likes to feed on banana flowers. And it was quite a ubiquitous bird we saw throughout our adventures in Colombia. You know, we did on the final morning before flying to Panama, a group of us struck out for the botanical gardens and added a couple species, but due to time constraints, I didn't include a slide to that. Sorry, guys. But I wanted to finish off with a couple of key takeaways from the experience. First of all, birding in the tropics is a life-altering experience. Cannot recommend it more heavily. The other thing I wanted to say is that to understand the behavior, migration, feeding strategies of birds really helps you understand how to bird in the tropics. And also, you know, it sets healthy expectations for what you'll see and why sometimes you don't see a great number of birds, but that the birds you do see are really special. And so I recommend you read Birds in Tropical America by Stephen Hilty. Here's what it looks like. I can't see if you guys can see, but that's a honey creeper. Yeah, so I really recommend you read this book. Understanding the behavior feeding strategies are important, and this book gives you a really fantastic grounding in that sort of theory before you go. To see special birds, you have to travel to remote places, which means toughing it out and not being a baby and complaining about discomforts, which I failed miserably at. I would always choose tour organizers who have experience in planning birding trips because they will anticipate your needs and your challenges and will make sure that you are taken care of and you're comfortable and have what you need. Don't allow travel advisories to scare you off, you know, within reason, obviously, but I have read the Canadian government's travel advisories on places I've been to, South Africa, Egypt, and now Colombia. And it has been like Bible length warnings. And while of course all of them, you know, they're not making them up, it's just, you know, go with a reputable tour agency, and you need never see any of the kind of scary stuff they talk about in there. Eat the fruit. Don't sue me if you do and get the trots. But, you know, we ate fresh salads. We ate fresh fruits. We enjoyed the local fare so much. And I think with 1 or 2 brushes with toilet drama, we were all fine. But I do recommend you get a Dukoral vaccine, which is that traveler's stomach vaccine. It's just a nice layer of protection if you do have a sensitive stomach. And even if you don't, it's nice just to, you know, cover your bases. But yeah, don't shy away from all the beautiful exotic fruits. Follow the protocol people mentioned, for example, washing them with soap and water. Don't eat already peeled fruit, all of that jazz. But don't like let the warnings hold you back from exploring the local cuisine because it was fabulous. And then what I wanted to finish off by saying is that this was such a successful trip. We had so much fun, and we had twice as much fun because we traveled with people that we know and that we've birded with in the past and that we really like and get along with, which is our fellow Delta Nats. And I'm just so grateful that I had the hare's-brained idea to reach out to the DNS and say, does anyone want to come to Colombia with me? Because I just loved the trip so much more because I got to hang out with such great people. So I would say that if you're planning a trip and you want travel companions, you know, send an email to deltanaturalists@gmail.com. I've gotten Bruce and Nikki's blessing for you to send an email and just explain a little bit about the trip you want to go on, how many spots are available, when you would like to go, how much it might cost, and they'll put a little note in the next newsletter. And if people are interested, they can contact you. You know, we're all huge fans of birding and nature and travel. We should be doing more of these kinds of cool international trips together. All right. So thank you, everybody. And a huge thanks to the photographers of the trip, Carrie Zhao, Dave Hoare, Noreen Rudd, Chris McVitie, and Christine Gaio. Thank you so much. I have these photos, not just for this presentation, but for life, for memories. And I'm really grateful. All right. I made
thank you. Thank you, Thea. That was absolutely wonderful.
Yay. So I can
I haven't been anywhere in so long, and it makes me want to just jump on a plane and go.
Good, that was the goal.
The birds, all the different foliage, the scenery, everything just looks so incredible. And you're right about going with people that you really know and enjoy spending time with. That was great.
Yeah.
I don't see anything on the chat. Do people have questions?
Yeah, I have a comment if that works. I would also add to the end of that is reaching out to the Delta Nats as resources, travel resources, because people like yourself and David and Chris, and there's been a lot of international travel done, and just the resources that are available to the people in the club just by asking questions on what to do, what to bring, what to wear is there's just a wealth of knowledge out there. I think we need to start communicating with each other and getting that information to each other for sure.
That is so true, because Nadine and I, when we sat, we would have people over for lunch for us to discuss our trip, and Dave and Noreen would come with their lists, and I was just like, usually I'm the person who does all this research, and just to have this incredible wisdom. We probably swerved so many uncomfortable moments because of the prep we were able to do, because of the sort of shared wisdom of our group. And so, yes, you're 100% right. Like, absolutely reach out if you have questions about where to go, what to see, and how to prepare, and what to take with you.
There's one comment here from Janet Heavyside saying, excellent talk. Thank you, Thea.
Oh, she was a great travel companion.
It was a wonderful talk. And I don't know when you think you're going to do the Panama piece, but we'll schedule something, and I'm sure that will be wonderful too.
Oh,
Give you a little break.
This time I'll have some audio to share if it's an in-person.
Yeah.
So Thea, you're going to put the link to that video, or
yes,
have you, or send it out?
I haven't. I can attach it here to the Zoom call, but as soon as the call ends, I think you'll lose the chat.
Send it to the email address, and then Nikki can post it to the group. That would be great.
Great.
And yeah, I'd say excellent. Overall, excellent. Like, good. I think you should sell your PowerPoint to tourism. So, yeah, very, very well done. Very well done.
You can tell I work in marketing.
Yeah.
Great.
All right. So I think that's it for tonight. If there's no more questions, I just want a couple of real quick things just to go back on. Reminder Sunday at Rifle.